The clock that fed on insects. There once lived a clockmaker named Elias Crane, a man with trembling hands and haunted eyes. For many years, he worked in his dim workshop, crafting clocks that ticked with perfect rhythm. Yet Elias despised the sound of ticking. To him, it was not a comfort, but a reminder of time's cruelty, each second dragging him closer to death. So he began building a clock unlike any other. A clock that would not tick. A clock that would not chime. A clock that would never remind him of time's passing. He worked by candlelight for months, carving the wood, shaping the brass, and fitting strange gears that seemed to hum without sound. At last, the timepiece stood before him, tall, black, and polished like a coffin. Its face was smooth, without numbers. Its pendulum swung, yet gave no sound. When Elias placed it in the corner of his shop, he felt the silence deepen, heavy as a grave. At first, the townspeople admired it. Such peace, they whispered. No ticking, no ringing, no noise to disturb the night. They asked Elias to build more. And so he did. Soon, every home had one of his silent clocks. But then something strange began to happen. Voices in the town grew softer, as though swallowed by the air. Dogs no longer barked. The church bells rang, but no sound carried from them. The laughter of children faded until their mouths opened wide in silence. Even the cry of a newborn vanished into nothing. Panic spread. Mothers clutched their children, unable to hear their sobs. Men shouted in the streets, but only silence answered. The town was smothered in a dreadful hush, as if the very world had been muted. One night, Elias sat in his workshop, staring at the great black clock. The pendulum swung like a slow heartbeat. And in that silence, he heard something, faint, but unmistakable. A whisper. Not a whisper of words, but of hunger. The clock, he realized, was not silent at all. It was feeding on every sound, every laugh, every scream. And still it was not full. The next morning, the townspeople broke into his workshop, their faces pale with terror. They tried to smash the clocks, but when they struck them with hammers, no sound came from the blow. The wood splintered in silence, and the clock stood unbroken. In desperation, they dragged Elias to the town square and demanded he destroy his creation. But Elias only laughed, though no one heard his laughter. For in the silence, madness had taken him. One by one, the people of the town lost their voices entirely. Their lips moved, their throats strained, but no sound ever came again. The children grew up in silence, the birds flew without song, the world became a vast tomb where not even the wind dared to howl. And still, in the ruined workshop, the black clock ticks without ticking. Its pendulum swings in eternal hunger, devouring every echo, every whisper, every cry. Some say if you stand near it long enough, you will hear the last voices of the town, not gone, but trapped inside, screaming forever in silence. The portrait that wept. In a dim little house at the edge of town lived a painter named Adrian. He was a quiet man, pale and sorrowful, for the woman he loved, Eliza, had died before their wedding day. Her beauty had haunted him ever since, not only in dreams but in every empty corner of his home. Adrian could not bear the silence she left behind. So, with trembling hands, he set up his easel and began to paint her face. Every detail, every shade of sorrow, every whisper of the smile he once knew. For weeks he worked, sleeping little, eating less. He whispered to the canvas as if Eliza herself could hear. When at last the portrait was finished, it was so lifelike that visitors gasped. Her eyes glistened, her lips seemed ready to part, her skin glowed faintly in the candlelight. But there was something more, something no brush could capture, yet somehow was there. A heaviness, a soul. Adrian placed the portrait in his bedroom and spent his nights staring into Eliza's painted eyes. He swore he could feel her presence. Then came the sobbing. At first it was faint, like a sigh carried by the wind. Adrian thought it was his imagination. But as the nights grew longer, the sobs deepened, low and aching, like a woman grieving in the dark. Guests who stayed in his house would wake pale and trembling, swearing they had heard a woman crying in his chamber. By dawn, the truth always revealed itself. The canvas was wet. Drops like tears streaked from Eliza's painted eyes, leaving faint stains along the frame. Adrian did not recoil, he rejoiced. She weeps because she misses me, he whispered. Her soul is with me still. But as weeks passed, the sobbing grew louder. At night the whole house seemed to drown in sorrow. The walls echoed with Eliza's grief. Sleep fled from Adrian, replaced with a feverish devotion. He knelt before the portrait, begging her to speak, begging her to step out of the frame. One night, neighbors heard a scream from Adrian's house, sharp, then cut off into silence. When they entered, they found his bed empty, his easel broken. The portrait hung where it always had, but the painted Eliza was no longer alone. Her eyes were no longer fixed on the distance. They were turned downward, gazing with sorrow upon a figure now painted at her side, Adrian himself, pale and lifeless, forever captured beside her. And still, the portrait weeps. Visitors swear that in the still of night, they hear two voices sobbing. By dawn, the canvas is stained with twice as many. The house with no echo. On the edge of a dying forest stood a manor long abandoned. Its windows were blind with dust, its walls cracked like old bones. The villagers called it the house with no echo. Few dared to enter, for they said that inside, sound itself was swallowed, footsteps, voices, even the creak of doors. It was a place where silence did not live but devoured. One autumn evening, 3 travelers sought shelter there. Rain lashed the earth, and the manor loomed like a blackened tomb. With no other refuge, they forced open its door and stepped inside. At once, they felt it, a silence so heavy it pressed against their skin. They spoke to one another, but no sound rose from their lips. Their mouths moved, their throats strained, yet the air carried nothing. They stamped their boots, clapped their hands, even struck the walls with sticks, all in vain. The house drank it all. The youngest traveler, terrified, tried to leave. But when he pushed the door, the hinges groaned in silence. The storm outside raged, yet no thunder reached them. The house had stolen even the voice of the sky. As they explored, they noticed something stranger still. Their breaths grew faint, their heartbeats weaker. The silence was not only stealing sound, it was stealing life. The oldest traveler collapsed first, clutching his chest. His companions screamed, yet no cry escaped them. His body lay still, but the silence around him deepened, as if the house had absorbed his final breath. The 2 remaining tried to flee, but the halls twisted endlessly. Every stair led back to the same corridor. Their footsteps grew lighter, fainter, until they felt themselves fading with them. The last thing they saw before the darkness took them was the walls themselves, pulsing faintly, like a throat swallowing. The next morning, villagers passed the manor. Its windows looked darker, its walls thicker, as though the house had grown. They say it still waits, hungry. Those who enter vanish, not with screams, but with silence. The house swallows them whole, until nothing remains, not even an echo. The grave bells whisper. In the old town of Black Hollow, death was never trusted. Too many times, coffins had been sealed too soon, and the living buried alive. To guard against this horror, the Ashford family followed an old custom. Each coffin in their family crypt was fitted with a string tied to the corpse's hand. The string ran through the soil, up to the surface, where it was fixed to a small iron bell. If ever a buried soul awoke in their coffin, they could ring and be saved. For years, the bells stood still in the moonlit graveyard, silent and rusting. But one cold November night, the silence broke. The bell above the newest grave began to ring. At first it was faint, a soft, trembling chime carried by the midnight wind. The caretaker, hearing it, ran to the Ashford Manor with terror in his eyes. Soon, the whole family stood in the cemetery, lanterns flickering, hearts pounding. The bell was still ringing. Not fast, not desperate, but slow, steady, as though each pull came with great effort. Dig! The patriarch roared. Shovels struck the earth. Soil flew. Their breath came heavy with fear. At last, the coffin was uncovered. With trembling hands they pried open the lid. Inside lay the pale body of Margaret Ashford, dead these past 3 weeks. Her eyes were closed, her lips blue, her skin cold as ice. Yet in her hand, the string was clenched tight. She cannot be alive, one whispered. They pressed an ear to her chest. No heartbeat, no breath. But then the bell above them rang again. Their lanterns shook. For though Margaret lay still, her lips had parted. And from them came a sound, not a cry, not a scream, but a faint whisper, thin as smoke. No one could make out the words. Some swore she spoke their names. Others believed it was not her voice at all, but something else that had taken her mouth as its own. The family fled, leaving the coffin open, the bell still tied to her lifeless hand. And all through the night, the bell rang softly, steadily, though the dead woman never stirred. Even now, the villagers say, if you walk by the Ashford crypt on a moonless night, you can hear it, a thin, trembling chime, and a whisper that rides the wind. And if you dare to lean close to the open coffin, you will learn the truth. For the whisper is not asking to be saved. It is asking you to join her. The candle in the crypt. When Jonathan Hale inherited the Blackthorn estate, he received more than crumbling walls and broken windows. Beneath the house lay a vast crypt, built by ancestors long dead, where generations of Hales rested in their stone coffins. On his first night in the house, Jonathan noticed something strange. Though the crypt had not been opened in years, a faint golden glow seeped through the cracks in its heavy iron door. He unlocked it, lantern in hand, and descended the cold steps. At the far end of the crypt, upon a marble slab, burned a single candle. Its flame danced though no one had touched it. The wax never melted, the wick never shortened. It simply burned. Jonathan, unnerved, snuffed it out. Yet the next night, when he returned, the candle was burning again. The servants whispered that the candle had burned for generations. None dared to touch it. They said it was lit by the dead themselves, a flame that tethered their souls to the crypt. To extinguish it was to invite their wrath. But Jonathan was a man of reason. He laughed at superstition. It is only a trick, he told himself. And yet, curiosity gnawed at him. Each night he went down, and each night the candle burned as if mocking him. One evening, restless and determined, Jonathan stayed in the crypt after midnight. He sat before the flame, watching it sway. Hours passed, and the silence grew heavy. Then he heard it, a whisper. It came not from the air, but from the flame itself. Faint voices, layered together, sighing in sorrow. He leaned closer, straining to hear. The voices grew clearer. They called his name. The coffins around him groaned. Stone lids shifted. A cold draft swept the chamber though no wind could reach so deep underground. Jonathan tried to flee, but his feet felt chained to the floor. The candle burned brighter, casting long, shivering shadows that moved on their own. From the corners of the crypt, figures rose, pale, hollow-eyed, draped in rotting shrouds. Ancestors long dead, their mouths open in voiceless cries. They reached toward the flame as though it were the last piece of their souls. Jonathan screamed, but no sound escaped him. The candle flared white, then went out. The next morning, the servants found the crypt silent and dark. The candle, once eternal, was gone. And so was Jonathan Hale. But on the seventh night, the glow returned. A single candle burned again upon the slab. Its flame swayed gently, as though it carried the whispers of another trapped soul. And if you listen closely in the crypt, you will hear Jonathan's voice among them. Open menu. Go to Reddit answers. Expand search. Create post. Open inbox. User avatar. Expand user menu. Art scary stories icon. Go to scary stories. Art scary stories. 8 hours ago. No_prob_Rob. Join. The confession. Father Cohen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The woman on the other side of the confessional booth has not implicitly mentioned anything illegal by any stretch of the word, but the things she had said so far made him feel like her issues are significantly more concerning than she's letting on. I feel like I'm losing my mind, Father, the woman said. We've all been in that place, in one way or another, child, the priest answered. But is it too much to ask for me to be happy? Tell me what happened, Father Cohen replied, wanting more information from the woman. She took a deep breath and sighed. It's been 2.5 years since that damned disease took my husband, Father. 36 months since I buried him. I mourned. I drowned in grief. In loneliness. The woman paused, audibly holding back a sob. That heavy mound of loss was back in her throat again, and she was fighting to keep it down. A few seconds passed as an uneasy quiet settled between them. I'm so sorry for your loss, the priest said, filling in the silence while the woman collected herself. The woman sniffled. They say time heals all wounds, right? So I did my best to hold on to whatever piece of sanity I had left. I sought company. But every time I try to move on, I see him everywhere. The tension on the priest's shoulders relaxed and relief washed over him. It's just grief, he thought to himself. He was no stranger to members of his congregation battling all sorts of grief. He considered what to say to reassure the woman that what she was feeling was normal without diminishing her struggle, that it was just her grief creating guilt out of nowhere. Before the priest could get a word in, the woman broke into silent weeping. I was loyal. I was faithful. I kept my promises. I took care of him and stayed with him until the end. But why won't he let me go? Why won't he let me be happy? Child, the priest began in his calmest and most caring tone, it is perfectly normal to move on, even in the eyes of God. Even the Bible tells us that there is a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. I'm certain that your husband, with the love that you shared, would not want the rest of your life to be only the season of weeping. God offers you permission to step into joy again, without shame. He paused, waiting for a response. When all that he heard was barely stifled sobs, the woman still obviously trying to regain her composure, he continued, you may feel like you're betraying him. Like you're breaking his heart. But you're not. If the two of you truly loved each other, he would want you to be happy. Remember the vow that you said when you married him. Did it not end with, till death do us part? This shame, this guilt that you feel when you seek joy and companionship from others is the pain of loss playing tricks on you. I understand what you're going through, but do you? The woman interjected, which caught the priest by surprise. Because I don't think you do, Father. Her voice was now dripping with raw emotion. Father Cohen felt the pain that the woman had has now not only intensified, but it has also shifted. Something else was there. Is this fear? He asked himself. What is she afraid of? It's not guilt, Father. And it's not my imagination. It's my husband. Haunting me, the woman said. And just like that, the heavy air of uneasiness and the tension in the priest's shoulders were back. I'm sorry. The priest stammered, unsure of how to respond. 6 months ago, I met this man at the library. Ben. I invited him over on our third date. We were about to kiss, and I had my eyes closed. But the kiss never came. He just pulled back and froze. Of course I looked away, ashamed that I may have misread the situation. The woman paused and held her breath. Father Cohen felt the woman having second thoughts about sharing the whole truth of what happened that night. When I turned back to look at him, she continued after a beat, that's when I saw him. He looked exactly the same way he did on his last day. Hollow cheeks, chapped lips, and dark circles under sunken eyes that looked right at me. My dead husband had his gaze fixed on me, but he was whispering something to Ben, who was just staring blankly into the wall behind me. His eyes were darting back and forth, as if he was watching something that only he could see. I pulled away so fast in shock and fell off the couch. I can still remember wincing from the pain as my lower back hit the hardwood floor. When I turned to Ben again, my husband was gone and Ben appeared to be snapping out of whatever he was seeing. Then he just got up, said an abrupt goodbye, and left. And I never saw him again. Father Cohen was completely at a loss for words. He definitely has had his fair share of people claiming there are ghosts of loved ones long past visiting them, though nearly all of them were confirmed to be either a complete hallucination or product of grief, as he had assumed was the case for this woman. But this was a different story. The same thing happened 2 months later when I invited James over, the woman explained. My husband's dead eyes stared at me while he leaned into James's ears, whispering something. Then James bolted right up and ran out of the apartment without even saying a word. Father Cohen swallowed a big lump. This was uncharted territory for him, and he had neither compass nor map to help him navigate it. He took in a breath and made the sign of the cross, silently asking God for guidance on how to proceed. Last night was the third time he showed up, she continued. I met Phil at the local bar on Main Street. I was just trying to drown the nightmares out with booze. Phil, as it happens, was also mourning a loss within the past year. We instantly connected. He was so nice, the woman then trailed off. The priest felt a fleeting moment of joy in the woman's expression, seemingly from remembering the short time she had spent with this new man she was describing. Then her reverie was cut short. He was too drunk to drive to his house on the other side of town, so I invited him to spend the night on my sofa. We walked up to my apartment. I opened the door, and when I turned back to Phil, my husband was there again. Staring intently at me, whispering something to Phil. I screamed at him. I tried asking him what he wanted, why he was doing this, but he just continued staring and whispering. I tried to shake Phil back to his senses. And by God I hugged him. I hugged him because I didn't want to be so lonely anymore. The woman was now completely bawling, no longer able to keep her emotions, her secrets, her fears. Then Phil just pushed me away. He had this horrified look on his face. Then he left. The woman paused, as if to mourn the loss of her almost relationship with the man. He used to only show up when I invite someone over. But since last night, I see him everywhere. He appears beside everyone I remotely try to approach. He was beside the cashier at Walmart this morning. He was in the bake shop. I couldn't even get gas for my car because he was standing right behind the attendant when I pulled into the gas station, ready to whisper to them if I dared to go near. Like he's warning everyone about me, all while staring at me with those dead eyes. It's that same look, the very same expression, the same dead eyes he had that night. The woman trailed off, broken sobs cutting off her sentence. When it was apparent that she is done talking for the time being, Father Cohen prompted for more information. "What do you mean that night? What happened?" he asked. Then, out of nowhere, a deep chill shot up his spine and goosebumps ran all over his body. There was a voice in his ear. "Now you're asking the right question, Father," it said. But it was not the woman's voice. It did not come from the other side of the confessional booth. It was too close. Father Cohen's head shot up to try and see where the voice came from, but when he looked up, he was no longer in the booth. The whole church was gone. Before him was a window looking into a room. In it, there was a bedridden man. He looked gaunt and sickly. Something told the priest that the man had been fighting whatever illness he had for a while at that point. A tray with a small ceramic bowl was beside him, and he was trying to eat what appeared to be bland and watery pumpkin soup. Father Cohen watched him struggle with coughing fits for several minutes, a deep sorrow washing over him as he witnessed the man's pitiful state. Then the man threw up uncontrollably on the side of the bed, the tray tipping over and the bowl crashing into the floor, breaking into a dozen small shards. The door into the room flew open and this woman came rushing in. She wore a worried look on her face, but more than that, a thick air of exhaustion radiated from her. Her demeanor revealed that it was the kind of exhaustion that was absolute and all-encompassing, the kind of exhaustion that led only to despair that blotted out any light of love, any ray of hope for the future. The woman looked at the bowl. Then at the blood that the man had just thrown up. Then she turned to the man. Tears fell down her face, the worried look washing away with it. All that was left was the exhaustion and the despair. She muttered something under her breath. Father Cohen noted that something in her had snapped. The woman walked up to the sickly man and gently wiped the blood off of his chin and lips. She brushed his hair with her fingers and looked into his eyes. Then without saying a word, she took a pillow and smothered the man. Father Cohen gasped, his right hand shooting up and covering his mouth. He then brought his fist to the window, desperately trying to stop the woman from murdering the man. But she did not appear to hear him. Still he kept banging on the glass pane. There was not much of a struggle between the man and the woman. The man had been too sick and weak to fight back. After about 2 minutes, the man's arms fell to his sides. The woman eased her hold on the pillow, and she just sat there staring at the man, now lifeless. A hot mixture of anger and sorrow boiled up in Father Cohen, and he started crying. He cried for the man. He cried for his inability to help. Unable to do anything other than stare in disbelief at what he had just witnessed, he fell to his knees. Then the voice spoke again, "It is already done, Father. Now you know the truth. Do with it what you will. It's in your hands now." The priest wiped away the tears. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the confessional booth. He could still hear the woman sobbing on the other side. Father Cohen took in a breath. And once again, he made the sign of the cross and prayed for guidance. Open menu. Go to Reddit answers. Expand search. Create post. Open inbox. User avatar. Expand user menu. Art scary stories icon. Go to scary stories. Art scary stories. 16 hour ago. Aegon of Egg Kingdom. Join. He who exists outside time. It is with great sadness I recount such events, that such timid behaviors could result in a knowledge that is so catastrophic hardly seems it could belong to a family line that I am part of. But I always was a cuckoo's child, so it makes a bit of sense that I was to remain ignorant of it. In the year 1955 my great-grandfather and grandmother Henrietta and James Greyfollow got married. They of course were related, second cousins. But even as I scan the vague photos, such a queer unease surrounds them. The monuments that decorated the halls were ones I had never seen before or since. They varied in shape so much that it would take too much time to remember and describe them, but one that struck me the most was this one that had great gray horns and the face of a dragon, eyes deep black despite the statue otherwise being made of white marble. Even through the picture I could feel its eyes meeting mine. My mother alleged they were the true shape of the angels. But if it was something truly benign, I wouldn't have had words to write. Another thing, the people at the wedding were dressed in long black robes with their faces hidden, and each held a flame rather than something like flowers. Following their marriage they moved into a seaside town. This was a place I'd visited in my childhood many times, and each time I did so it was most unsettling. There never seemed to be more than a handful of people out despite the town's circumference being quite large. Each time we crossed them they always smiled at us. My young mind perceived them as mocking, but now that I have had time to reflect on these memories it almost seems like they were giddy or eager. The town also had this queer ability to shift. One shop would be in another place, a street would be there that wasn't there before. At one point I remember walking in between two buildings and there was a room that shouldn't be there between them. Its width was greater than the space that should have held it, and yet it fit comfortably between two buildings. There was no curve to the buildings it was between, and by all means the edges should have cut into it. But, how do I describe it? The edges were visible all the way to the ground, and so were the walls of the room. There was nothing making its way for it, though there should have been. I know this isn't easy to visualize and it's hard to explain, but it was the first hint about this town that I began to perceive as unordinary. After their marriage they had two children, my uncle John and my mother Alexandria. In the year 1975 my uncle would take his own life. He'd break into a public pool with a gallon of gasoline and threw it into the pool. He set himself ablaze and jumped in, and as he burned, he was calling out the words, "They're trying to drag me to the sea. All I can dream about is him." This was when he and my mother were visiting England, thinking a change of scenery would help him. He'd been going through a severe bout of depression and paranoia and had already tried to take his life previously. It was a whole spectacle, even made the news. He wasn't the only one to die, the majority of the people inside also perished with him. At the autopsy, there was something odd in his brain, another pair of eyes growing in the frontal lobe and a pair of metallic silver horns in the parietal. This last bit news did not reach American soil and was covered so well it hardly traveled outside the town of Fairbury, where the coroner resided. He took his life fairly recently, in the year 2012. In his suicide note he wrote the words, "I see what the boy was talking about. I have gazed into the nebulous eye of him and he stares back at me, and I know what the word, fear, means for the first time. He is not something that should exist. I can hear his song, piercing and malevolent is his gaze. Wanda, my love, I can only hope he doesn't lay eyes on you." Speaking of which, when I took a job at a nursing home, hopeful that I would find answers to a myriad of questions that plagued my mind, and being hired due to my experience at various hospitals, I had an opportunity to speak to Wanda. I asked her about her husband, and who he was. And she burst into such hysteria that I worried she would pass at the very moment. When she told me to get out, it was in a voice that was not her own. Back to my mother, for that is where this tale continues. Now she and my grandparents have always had a strained relationship, and I believe it started around the time my uncle committed suicide. He had been the favored one, and they had treated him like the prince that he was. They hadn't intended to send her off to a prestigious college, but as my uncle had no need of his college fund, they sent her off for a career. She became a medical doctor and moved to Australia, where she met my father and the two got married. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. In one of her years in college she and some of her friends decided to use a Ouija board. They were at one of her friend's house for her birthday party and were, aside from the woman at the party, all alone. Now, whenever my mother touched the board, she smelled the faint scent of the sea, and this was very strange as the house lived nowhere near the ocean, and any lakes were miles off. But she and her friends kept playing until the board eventually spelled a series of words. "I can see you, Amy," and then the board flew through the window and the power went out. My mother and her friends became aware of something wet sounding running loudly down the hallway, and then the door burst open. In the darkness the woman beheld the presence of something that was not human for the first time and were frozen, too terrified to move, until the sun rose, beholding nothing in the open air other than the damp, dark wet footprints that were not shaped like anything humanoid. That takes us to the year 1985 and my birth. My first ever memory, much later of course, was being laid gently in water, and whether it was a baptism gone wrong or some other such thing I was entirely unsure. But I nearly drowned, and when I did I remember hearing this, noise, not a scream, more like a discordant harmony. I was pulled out just before I passed away and I beheld the eyes of my mother. The look in her eye was one I always remembered, it was one I will never forget. I didn't know how to explain it at the time, but if you were to ask me now, it would be the face of someone thinking, what did I just do? Throughout the course of my life, my mother showed signs of mental illnesses. Whenever she was at work and able to distract herself by being busy, she was for the most part fine, or so my father, who was a surgeon, said so. When she got home, however, she'd do things that creeped me out, especially when I was younger. I'd find her standing in odd positions, gargling saltwater or humming. Sometimes I'd see her in the dark and not realize it was her at first, standing, soaking wet, murmuring in a growling tongue that did not sound anything like her. In the daytime she was paranoid and anxious when we were with her. Always looking over her shoulder as if something was watching her, sometimes telling me to stay away from pools or gasoline. Her odd behaviors did not cease as she aged and only grew worse. She at one point, though being far too old to have children, began to think she had got pregnant again and told everyone she was. She kept thinking she was going to have a son, and around that time I remember a large number of people coming over to our house. These people were descended from people who were friends of my grandmother's, and though they had maybe met my mother once or twice, were staying the nights at our house, and every now and then I'd wake to all of them over my mother, singing her praises and kissing her. I remember they were tattooing these symbols on her in veal blood, and she kept them on for weeks at one point. My father at this time was overseas, fighting in the Gulf War, so he had no idea any of this was happening. I was too young to explain exactly what was going on to him, and my mother, who I was scared of at just 6 years of age, was always there whenever I was talking, so I had no real way of telling him without jeopardizing my safety. But just before my father returned, it all ended one morning when they realized my mother wasn't showing any signs of pregnancy. She still got her period, she was not swelling at all. Finally, the jig was up when they went with her to the doctors and found she was not pregnant. When she got back home there was a change in her, she stopped this paranoia and the staying up at night and was acting normal. This didn't last long, she had spells of anger that came and went, and they were so intense it led to my father divorcing her and him taking me and leaving. What became of my mother, for a while I did not know. My life progressed as you might expect. No other strange things happened until about a decade and a half after I got out of nursing school. In that time I got married, pregnant, and divorced. I had a son, Julian, and a daughter. My father passed away. He worked as a deckhand for a large company and made a solid amount of money when he fell off the boat and drowned one afternoon. Things began to change one night in the middle of September. Julian was 3 at this time and he woke me up after a long, tiring shift. I was not pleased and ready to snap at him when he said something that made me stop, cold. "Mommy, TT, there's someone outside the window," he said. He was shaking and at the verge of tears. "She looks all big and gross and she's been making this weird noise." He opened his mouth and began making this low, croaking noise that occasionally stopped for maybe a second before going again, almost like a frog ribbiting. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand right up. I reached into the nightstand and pulled out my firearm before rushing to his bedroom. I hoped she wasn't really there. I hoped it had been a nightmare or some other such thing, but when I stepped into his room, I saw her. She was so white she was glowing in the gloom, and she looked like a bloated, dead corpse, rotted for years. And she had broken through the glass and was standing in the middle of the room. When she saw me she opened her mouth wide and began to make the noise, extending one long pointer finger directly at me. She started running to me and Julian. I pulled the trigger. Once, twice, till it was out of ammo and clicking dead in my hands. The bullets went through her but did not stop her advancing until she was within kissing distance. I could feel her warm coldness against my skin and could feel her sweet, musky, horrid breath into my nostrils and on my tongue. And then she was gone, just like that, as if she had never been. I'm sorry. I don't think I can continue tonight. There is more. I have yet to recount my encounter with him. More stuff from this point on, but writing it is something I cannot bring myself to do. Later, maybe, but not now.